Welcome to the Student Outcomes Podcast, where we tackle the biggest issues in education and explore bold, innovative solutions to create a fairer future for all students. I'm Sarah, and in each episode we'll be bringing together some of the most influential voices in the education sector to discuss how we can break down barriers and create lasting change. In this podcast, we explore the challenges and opportunities in higher education, from access and participation to equity and student success. Expect bold ideas, real stories and actionable strategies that can help move us forward towards a more inclusive and fair education system. So if you're passionate about creating better outcomes for students, then this is the place for you. In this episode, we talk to Graeme, founder of Neon, who shares a bit of his own personal story, the biggest challenges he sees students facing when it comes to fair access, and how he feels a Labour government will impact student equity. Graeme also shares his predictions for key future trends in higher education. So hit that follow button and let's start the conversation to inspire change, one episode at a time. Enjoy. So Graeme, thanks for joining me today on the Student Outcomes Podcast. Really happy to have you here. I'm just going to run through some of your background in terms of your career, just for those of you who maybe haven't come across you.
Okay.
Probably
fine.
very few people who haven't come across you because you've been around for a little while, haven't you, Graeme?
A while, yeah. Fortunately, yeah. But yeah, a bit of a while, I guess.
So some would say, I would say actually, you are a very prominent figure in the field of widening access to higher education and social mobility. So you've been active in the area since 1995, around that time?
More or less, yeah.
Yeah. So you've got over 25 years experience in education, research and management. And you've led several regional initiatives for widening access. And that includes AIM Higher Central London Partnership. And I know you also headed up under the partnership as well. So you've got that under your belt. Currently, you're the head of the Centre for Inequality and Levelling Up at the University of West London. And you're also the director of the National Education Opportunities Network, more fondly known as NEOM. And you've also been involved internationally as the chair of the World Congress Access to Post-Secondary Education. And that is something that works towards global education accessibility. And on top of that, you've authored several works on social mobility and education, contributing to policy and academic discussion. So, you've been busy, Graeme.
Yeah. So I've done quite a lot of work, I guess. I think NEOM particularly has been a big part of my career in the past 13 or 14 years. And obviously working regionally in London for nearly 20 years now with Access HE, the network that we started after AIM High was defunded in 2011 or so. So, yeah, and obviously we also try to look internationally as well, Sarah. I think it's important that we try and look what's happening in other countries and that we look where we can make a contribution, but also what we can learn from what's happening in other countries. There is a global community of people working on these issues, and we've tried hard via NEOM to be part of that community, and in essence as well, where we can offer leadership where it's appropriate. So and also try and maintain that scholarly work as well as important, that research element.
It's interesting you build up, so you bring up the global element. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, because that's just that's an interesting point to actually come back to. But I think generally in terms of all of that work that you've done, that I've gone through, probably missed some bits in there, so forgive me.
Sure, no problem.
But how would you generally summarise the work you do, and why do you do it, Graeme?
Well, I guess in summarising what we do, the focus hasn't changed. I guess it has been about addressing inequalities in access and success in higher education. And it's both access and success. Access without people achieving their potential, particularly in the era we live in at the moment, where we have a very high expensive tuition fee regime in England, of course, and the pressures upon students. Without that success, then access becomes, actually a problem more than a solution. And so I think it's that focus has never changed. The data shows that inequalities still exist, and we believe that the work that we've been involved with through NEON, Access HE and others, and my colleagues across the country have been involved with over the years, has made a big difference to the lives of young people and older students. But it doesn't mean that there isn't much more work to do. For me, I became involved in this because I was one of the students that we've tried to support. I came from Blackpool, from a very low-income background in Blackpool, from a council estate, one of the poorest parts of the country. And my parents left school when they were 14, with no qualifications. And in a time when most people left school when they were 14 with no qualifications, it was a common thing to do then. Most people did in the well, they left school in the 50s, 40s even. It's quite old. So yeah, I mean, it's a long time ago. And then and I went on to a kind of well-renowned university, if you like. So that journey for
Yeah, you
me was
did.
quite a big one. So and then I guess from then on, it shaped a lot of my life. And I went to be a sociology lecturer. I did my PhD looking at adults, going back to education, actually, not young people. It was
So
adults, not young people.
Graham, what made you make that leap into higher education, given the background of your parents? I think we know from a lot of research, kind of
Sure.
parental influence is really important when it comes to trajectories,
Yeah,
life opportunities. So what
sure.
made you think,
Well, yeah,
you
my
know,
parents had no influence on me in that regard whatsoever, really, because I was, fortunate enough to do well at school. And when I was in my sixth form, they encouraged students to apply to certain types of universities and offered a lot of support for that. And so I took the opportunity up. I always felt you should take the opportunities that you're offered. So I tried to do that. But I had no huge ambitions to progress to a particular type of university. I was keen to go to university, I guess, a particular type of university. And then I guess because sometimes if you have almost less pressure on you, then that can be an advantage. It's difficult nowadays. A lot of student people don't have the opportunities that they need. A lot of young people simultaneously are also under more pressure than they need to be. And that can be problematic. And I guess for me, my advantage was I wasn't in that
what's the
regard.
additional pressure you thinking young people are under today?
Yeah, I think
What,
so. I think so. So, I
yeah.
mean, academic achievement is important. It's crucial. I mean, we would not think, if we didn't think it was important, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. But it doesn't mean that you have to pressure young people to go and do certain things if that's not what they don't want to do, if that's not their desire or their aspiration. And also, it's important the messages that come out that say that if you don't do as well as you think you would have done, then the world hasn't ended for you. But at the same time, you have to support young people to try and achieve their own potential, and that's an important thing as well. But yeah, I think the pressure element is more intense, perhaps more than when I was growing up in the 90s, when we didn't have the sort of league tables, didn't have that kind of comparative judgment element that actually puts schools under pressure, and then that pressure actually translates itself down to the pupils. Actually, that's really one of the big challenges. And I think certainly, as you've seen with changes to the way schools are graded under Ofsted recently, that's hopefully maybe a small step on the road to thinking about how we judge success, how we judge success of schools and teachers and pupils in a way that's more holistic and reduces the pressure at the end of the day on those young people.
So what keeps you going, Graham? Why are you doing the work that you're doing?
Well, I guess I continue to believe in the work that I do. I continue to believe it to be important. I think it's probably an unfortunate reality that when I stopped doing this work, the challenges that I began with this work will still be there. Unfortunately, I would think. But it doesn't mean that we don't continue to believe neon, that we can make a difference. And I think that's important as well, Sarah, that you think you're still making an impact and a difference in what you're doing. But the way you do that changes over your career and over time as your role changes. And I think also having a community of people who do the work that you do and others that share those beliefs and take part in that work is really important, because like anybody, you always have times where you believe you're not making progress, and it's hard, and it also becomes repetitive. Anything was repetitive after a time. It's important you need to challenge yourself. And again, the international dimension for my work is important, that you have opportunity to think what's happening in other countries and broaden your thoughts on that. We have a responsibility, I think, to contribute to inequalities work in HE work in other countries where we can. In the UK, we're relatively one of the countries where we have done more work in this area than many other countries in the world. I'm not saying that's better work, we've done more. The evidence that we've accumulated shows that clearly. Therefore, because we've done that work, we have a responsibility to share it and also to learn as well, by the way. And I think that's important. So I think that dimension has been an important part of my work in the past 10 years. And I think it will continue to be so in the future.
Yeah, thanks for that, Graham. Yeah, it's nice to just really reflect, I suppose, on, like you say, progress. And sometimes if you feel like you're not making it, and repetition, and it does. Sometimes you feel like you're stagnating, but yeah,
Absolutely.
I think it's important to understand that what the work that we're doing does change lives, and it does make an impact, even if you can't necessarily see it at that point in time. Sometimes these things just have a bit of a lag in terms of the impact and the effect that they have on young people in their lives.
Absolutely, they do, and I think also where you can, connecting with those you serve is really important, particularly when you're involved in the sort of role that I am, where you're not as directly connected with students as perhaps you were in another part of your career.
Mm-hmm.
You have to try and find those opportunities where they present themselves. Because the reality is that there is a need for different kinds of roles, and the reality is in those roles you don't connect with students like you did. That's just how it is. There isn't the time.
Mm-hmm.
You're still serving them, but you're doing it a different way. But to be able to connect with them is important as well, because essentially that's what you're there to do. And unless you can do that, you almost forget why you're doing what you're doing. And the why is really important, Sarah. As you pointed out in your question, the why is crucial. It's the why that drives you forward. And if you lose sight of that, then you can stagnate, and you can therefore also, and also to innovate as well is important, to be able to have innovatory ideas and to be able to change. And I think it's doubly difficult in some regards, post-pandemic, when we're all working more remotely. And in Neon, of course, we used to have our capacity building program, Sarah, used to be entirely face-to-face. So we would have 15 or so events a year, and they'd all be face-to-face. And I didn't attend every event by any means, but we'd go to more events, we'd see more of our colleagues in our community. And it's not like that anymore. We have our conference, we have maybe one or two more things, and the rest is remote. And that's okay. I mean, our members are happy with that. It's economically better, in a time when the education sector's under pressure financially. It's economically a better thing. So it's not as if it's a bad thing, but it does mean that you aren't, that face-to-face connection even of your colleagues and that learning isn't the same thing. It's important to think about that as well. It's great to have face-to-face work. It opens up new possibilities, but it also creates challenges. And you see why at our annual conference people are so happy to be there, because
I did see that at the last one.
They've seen each other all year, basically.
Oh yeah,
it's bound to be. And they've seen people. But in their own regions, they'll see people, but not in the same national dimension. It's important.
I think that connection point is a really important one, because I suppose the work that we are doing is about kind of working with hearts and minds of young people in a way, not to kind of get too deep, but that is what we're doing, and that's at the crux of it. And having that face-to-face connection and contact really does help kind of cement a connection that you might have with a student, and help to embed those different, I suppose, thoughts and beliefs and different ideas that you might want to instill in them. Just, if you're wanting them to think about their own self-efficacy, or just generally believe in themselves and things that they can do, then doing that face-to-face and having that connection is important. So it's a good point you bring up about that. Okay, so we did speak about, you mentioned earlier, some of the pressures on young people today, and that it's a bit more immense. So thinking about, I suppose, the biggest challenges you see for access and participation today, what would you say those are?
Well, I think some of the challenges are ones that are perennial and always been there. If we look at the data, not just in this country, across the world, we know that those students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, students with forms of disabilities, students with certain ethnic backgrounds, students' identities are all a mix of ethnicity, gender and economic background. When they come together in certain ways, then we know there are groups who do not do as well in the educational system. And the reasons for that are that, of course, they, in their own backgrounds, their parents and their families, they also probably didn't do as well as they could do. Like, they exited the system early. And I always say this, people say it means that their parents don't want them to do well. That's not the case. They do want them to do well, but they may see success in different ways. And they may also not have the same tools to support them. And if they don't do so well, then if they don't achieve the highest grades, then for them, as long as they're happy, that's okay. So there's all those sort of issues when it comes to those differences in attainment at school. And I think in an increasingly competitive environment as well, don't forget, where for certain groups in society, educational success has become everything. So that they will go a long way to ensure that their children do well at school, which is fine. That's what they want to do. That's fine. It's not criticism. But it means that in a competitive scenario, if you're one group who are utilising all their tools and resources to achieve success, another group who are utilising what they have, but also perhaps don't even see success in necessarily as
the same,
black and white terms, if you like, then you're going to see groups who always do. So they're perennial challenges. They manifest themselves different perennial ones. That's always be a challenge for access. I think how we link with schools and how HE's messages in schools is difficult. Back in the I guess, in aim higher. And then we tried to do it through Access HE and Neon as well, trying to think about how we support young people to think about their futures at early ages.
Yeah,
we know that
yeah.
through primary school, young people think about their options, and they think about it seriously as well. We did some research over 10 years ago with year 7 pupils, and we asked them what they wanted to do in the future. And people think, oh, they want to be astronauts or footballers or build Love Island or something. It's not the case. Many of them wanted to be doctors. They wanted to be teachers. They wanted to work. They wanted to do things that they'd seen other adults doing. Okay, that's what they do. Now, okay, if you see your parents and you realize they've gone to university or they're doing some professional job, you tend to want to do that job. So for those young people who don't see that in their lives because they're parents doing other things, for them to be able to see other opportunities, it's not saying to them, don't work in a certain area of work that your parents are in that didn't involve a degree. That's not a good thing. It's enabling them to understand other opportunities at an early age. And the opportunity to do that's difficult because the resources to do that aren't there like they were maybe 10, 15 years ago. That's another challenge.
Yeah.
And thirdly, I guess the cost challenge is a big one now. I think it's more acute than it's ever been. We know that economically there has been an increase in the past 5 years or so in families who are facing, strong economic challenges, and that desire then to go into debt, which is significant, and then meet also significant cost of living issues when you're a student as well. In then selling that, if you like, to young people with certain backgrounds is a challenge. Yet at the same time, we know that many young people still want to go on to HE, even though they know these challenges are there. Then the challenge becomes, how do we ensure that they achieve their potential? That we don't have a system where we've got a group of students who are able to devote the majority of their time to their studies and able to focus on them. Another group of students who are having to work maybe increasing part-time hours, constantly concerned about finances, and aren't able to focus on their studies like the other group are. And if you can't focus on the studies in the same way, you're not likely to do as well. That's just quite obvious. So that's another, actually it's a new challenge, but it's really become more acute in recent years. And that's one that I think we're grappling with, but haven't got a policy solution to yet.
Yeah, I think it's a pertinent one because we have been doing some research over the years generally in relation to, I suppose, finances for students and those that need to work additionally to bring in additional income. And you can see that there is a correlation between students that have, not as many resources to draw on economically in terms of their socioeconomic status, so they don't have parents that they can obviously get maybe some additional money from. They have to then go and work, and that then affects their experience at university, not being able to focus as much, having to worry more about the cost of actually being at university, buying books, all of that sort of thing. Yeah, that is something that came out. I mean, that was a little while ago now when we did that research, but you can see that, as you say, that's probably become just much more acute and much more come much more into focus recently, given the bigger challenges. And then I suppose we spoke about some of those, like you say, perennial challenges, things that have just always been there and might always be there. We maybe suggested a bit earlier. And I suppose, why do you think that is? Why is it something that we're just not able to solve?
I think as a society, we are, I won't say comfortable, we are comfortable with inequality. If we were so uncomfortable with inequality, we'd do much more about it, wouldn't we? But we're not. In a capitalist society like this one, we're comfortable with it. We accept the fact that some will have more, some will have less, but we've become more comfortable with the idea that some will not have a lot at all and some will have more. I mean, look at the food bank situation. I think about 15 years ago, there was 0 food banks. 0. They didn't exist, right? Now you've got something akin to 4 million parcels a year, I think, something like that.
Wow.
And they're also standard. There's one at the end of my road, and people just see it. Oh, that's a food bank. It's a food bank. But when I was growing up, we saw a food bank. And I grew up in a pretty poor environment, right? As poor as some of the environments we see at the moment. But we don't have food banks. Maybe we need them, but we have them. So we're comfortable with inequality in society overall. And then one aspect of that inequality is educational inequality. And we're comfortable with that. We're comfortable with the idea that some don't do well and some do better. What we've actually also seen, I think, is a concern in the past 4 to 5 years, is a narrative saying that essentially if you come from a certain background, you should do a certain thing. And that was something that actually, I guess when I first got into this work, was the idea that that's the idea that we fought against, and actually it became accepted an idea at the time that your background shouldn't define what you do. Whereas what happened in the past 5 years, people try to turn that around and say, well, actually, that's okay. Your background should define what you do. And we argue your background shouldn't define what you do. It doesn't mean that you can't do certain things for a certain background. We shouldn't define that. You have all sorts of things coming out as well. The narrative I think the last government pushed forward about higher education in access as well wasn't helpful. I mean, we had a conference in Neon just when the pandemic started with the then minister. And it was a well-attended conference, an online conference. Pandemic had just started. We were keen to connect. There were over 700 people on the call. And we were happy that she come to speak because ministerial input's really, really important. She used that speech in front of the Neon community, if you like, to tell us all that the work we've been doing since 2004 essentially been a bit of a waste of time. And we were deceiving students by giving them access to higher education. And that just is untrue. It wasn't the case.
Yeah,
there's going to be some people who go to higher education and think they should make better choices, but there are 400,000 other people who go every year. That's unfortunate. Of course it is. It's not a good thing. But yeah, I mean, people will make choices. They will get those choices in life. There were those who equally didn't choose to go to HE who would have wanted to go. Okay? And people didn't make choices, unfortunately. That's a problem in the system where they make choices young, but that's life. I'm afraid it's not good. But that was the focus of her talk. And then from then on, of course, we then had a continued narrative that wasn't perhaps the best thing to have people going into education. And we got a constant presentation of how great it is to do things that aren't in universities, aren't HE jobs, which, again, of course, those jobs are important, but also opportunities to go to higher education are important. They change lives. They give opportunities to people who won't have had opportunities before. And why should it be the case that all those untapped professional occupations should come with certain backgrounds? But equally, why should it be the case that those who don't go to professional, why should it be the case that say that those people who do my scaffolding, okay, are all essentially many of my scaffolders, my discussions with them, left school when they were 16 and then didn't do the qualifications. Why should other people do scaffolding like that? But in our society, we believe that's what things should be that way. And we fought against that. We'll continue to fight against that in Neon till, whenever Neon finishes.
Yeah, it's that wider ideology, really, that your postcode shouldn't determine your life trajectory, really, which, completely agree with. So, in your opinion, then, whose responsibility is it to address these challenges? Where does the responsibility lie?
It's a societal responsibility. I mean, of course, we point at politicians and policymakers to do these things, but they are often elected in by society. So we shouldn't look at just one group. It's an overall responsibility. I mean, universities themselves have a big responsibility in this area as well, of course, to take leadership and to focus on addressing inequality within higher education. I think that higher education, again, I spoke a moment ago about perhaps the previous government rather some of that negative approach to higher education, which I think they did have. But at the same time, higher education itself has to acknowledge where its challenges lie. Those of us in higher education and leaders in higher education are very happy to give speeches. I've heard, in my nearly 30-year career, how many speeches I heard, not just in this country from higher education leaders, are keen to tell everybody how great higher education is. And part of our job is also telling young people how good it is. As well as telling people how good it is and how opportunities it can provide and how we create knowledge, we have to acknowledge ourselves in higher education where our challenges are. Acknowledging that inequality is pervasive. Our global research has shown that we did a piece of work looking at the data on higher education participation by social background across the world. We found data in 90% of the countries in the world. The few we didn't, like Greenland, for instance, I don't know why. But anyway, in those 90% of countries that we found data for, which includes developing countries and richer countries and poor countries, you never know there are inequalities in participation by social background. It's pervasive across the whole of the global higher education system. But we're happy we don't want to talk about that which is fine. I mean, you always talk about your dirty laundry, so to speak, but we have to acknowledge that within education there's responsibilities of us as well. It's not just policymakers. It's in our own sector we have to acknowledge and take responsibility for this.
Yeah.
If you like, and I think that's something that we do, and some leaders do, and others don't, and others in the sector do, and others don't. So we work hard to try and support everybody to take responsibility.
Yeah, it's a good point in terms of shared responsibility. Like you say, there is that look to the politicians, but actually, sometimes you need to look a little bit closer to home and what it is that you're doing and what changes you can kind of affect as well in your own institution. Okay. So just thinking then about examples that you've come across in your 30-year tenure that have had a positive impact on improving access to higher education. Are there any that kind of jump out, spring to mind?
Had a positive impact. Well, yeah, I mean, I think it would be odd for me not to talk about the importance of collaborative projects, regional adopted projects. I mean, this is why I began my work with AIM Higher in the 2000s, and I continued to take that work forward. And obviously through the various iterations of collaborative work, through AIM Higher, through the NCOPs, through Unity Connect, etc. The importance of that regional collaborative work, I would say, is crucial because essentially is, I think we talked about this a moment ago, Sarah, it is a cross-sectoral challenge. So you need mechanisms of bringing those in school, college, higher education, or regional actors together. So I'd say that's really, really important. And in terms of driving forward change, I think that's really important. I think also the role of students is crucial themselves as ambassadors, as mentors, as advocates in this work. But there's a balance there as well. I think that we've worked in the past with students to co-design and co-create work, but it's important to recognise that it's not their responsibility. Responsibility of professionals, where sometimes we become very keen on the student voice, the student dialogue, and what shape all this. It does, but students are there to learn as well. We talked about achieving your potential before, but you can achieve your potential in higher education. You have to make sure that you spend the majority of your time studying. But that's the reality. I've taught in education for 20 years.
That is why you're there.
That's why you're there. Now, while you can be involved, and as involved as you can be, it's responsibility of professionals like me and others working in the sector to take this work forward. But that's a crucial role in terms of making a difference. I think more recently, I think the use of data has been really important. I think that's the change for me. Obviously, as we keep pointing out to my longevity here, that's covered a period where we had less data, put it that way, and less ability to collect data than we're starting than we do now. But I do think now that being able to understand and collect information about how engaged students are, how much they participate, and then using that as a mechanism to identify students and others who might need more potential, some more support of particular ways. I think that's a really important tool, and I've seen that, but just in this country and other countries, that kind of data-based approach. I mean, data alone doesn't change things. What data does is identifies those areas, either in your delivery or those groups of students who need greater support. It's the greater support then that makes a difference, by the way. It's not the data alone. It's not identifying, this group of students are the ones who possibly aren't maybe doing so well, they're not attending lectures so much, they're maybe struggling in early part of the course. But if you do anything about it, it doesn't make a difference, are you? So I say, the data itself didn't make a difference. What made a difference is you identified, then you have to get the right support for those students. But having said that, though, what we didn't have when I started was the ability to bring information together. We knew, I guess, because I started as a lecturer, so I knew the students in my group who weren't doing so well. We only knew that in my own group, okay? So I didn't know that across the board. We didn't have the ability to collect information. So I guess that I see that as something that's really made a bit of a bigger difference, or could make a bit of a difference in recent years. And I think that's an important approach because you do have the tools now to try and identify and support students much earlier. And we know when it comes to student success that, generally speaking, those students who aren't achieving their potential, it's often from the beginning they struggle a little bit, or they're under pressure. And then the problem is once you start to fall behind a little bit, then it's hard to catch up with things. And be able to identify that is really important. So I think that's a new thing now, but in the context of my career, then I think that's more recent. So I think that's important as well. So really 2 or 3 things make a big difference for me, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you talk about obviously bringing the data. Obviously, that's going to be something that I'm going to be slightly more biased on, but I've seen that working with
Sure.
Some of our clients on previous projects where they've used a data-driven approach, where they've actually looked to understand students, what their needs are, what their barriers are, how they're feeling about higher education. So a lot of this is emotive as well. And then using that information and then, kind of really designing their activities around that and those different subgroups as well and different segments, because obviously these students are not just one homogenous group.
Exactly.
But they're broken up into a lot of different kind of characteristics. So it's breaking those up into different subgroups, matching those activities with those students, and then kind of really getting that, being able to, come back to connection, really being able to connect with those students because you've identified and you are meeting those needs. And what we've seen is that activities that have that data-driven approach actually have a lot more impact, resonance, and have greater kind of metrics in terms of us obviously measuring the impact as a result versus ones that maybe haven't necessarily gone down that angle and are a bit more generic in a sense. So yeah, I would obviously kind of agree with that because I've generally seen that play out, to be honest.
And the other area I've always been interested in, and I think it's in this country we continue to have this debate, is when it comes to student success anyway, is the extent that we construct communities within the higher education system, when students enter higher education, related to people's identity and background, that then create positive communities that support certain types of students. So, for instance, I've done quite a lot of work looking at what happens in the US. And in the US, a lot of universities have extra support initiatives and support communities alongside other organisations that feel like first-generation students. So first-generation students identify as first-generation students and have support based around that. Okay. I've seen that happening in some universities in the UK because that I always felt one of the problems was that we would have access work. We would spend all this time identifying students, but a lot of effort's gone in the past 30 years to identifying the right type of students to work with in schools. So a lot of energy has gone on saying which postcode did this learner come from, which postcode does that learner come from. Huge amount of learner out of time, hours has gone into that. Money's just gone into that. Okay, great. You start to do that. Then when they enter university, that's it. They're the same as everybody else. So in April, right, of your up to April time, right, of your A levels or whatever, you identify and support this group of students. In September, no, don't do that. Because if we do that, we're stigmatized. Okay? Now, I see both sides of this. I see that you don't want to necessarily say to students, you're from a poor background, you're a poor student.
Yeah, that's
get all
it.
That.
Yeah.
But you're doing that, you're actually simply doing that when they're up to an end of A level. Now again, maybe that is the right approach, but we don't talk about that approach. We just do that. We didn't really think for that very much. And I think that's something that we didn't want to tackle. It seemed like a too difficult question to tackle. And what I have seen, and the problem I saw was that you had those in the institution who had done a lot of work on trying to understand certain groups of students and their backgrounds and their nature. When you came in, was that knowledge being transferred to those who work with the students? So academic staff, maybe, they're not saying they have the capacity to do that, but where's that transfer of knowledge and support there? I think that was, to me, was quite... And I do see that happen. I mean, we look at Neon now, I think, and again, the offers to students in their work and by trying to focus more on student success and access has made a difference. And you are seeing, I guess, institutions are seeing that the more holistic approach where you're trying to think about students and their background and outcomes, not just for the end, but as they progress through. And we've seen that happening. But I think that's an important area because a lot of that knowledge about different groups of students kind of existed or sat with those who worked with them before. And then when they came in, they were then thrown into the mix. And again, in some institutions, of course, it actually is de facto the case that a lot of students are from a different lower social backgrounds or the first generation or whatever. Because some students in some universities, I meet quite a lot of students from that background. But other students at universities are different and you still remain a minority. So those issues are important. How do you effectively support students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, certain ethnic backgrounds, those with certain sort of disability, without stigmatizing those students?
That's it,
but
you
have to acknowledge their identity. You don't stop becoming that person. If you say that to people, the flip side is you've got to hide who you are.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance, isn't it?
I hide who you are. Why be ashamed? It's like what's the difference between stigmatized and being ashamed?
Yeah.
I was not ashamed of where I came from. I'm not ashamed of where I came from now. Well, I'm not telling my students who are still teaching that you've got to be ashamed to come from a council estate. But I'm not sort of stigmatising either. But we didn't want to talk about it, I think. I think we talk about it more now. We didn't want to talk about it, certainly, I believe, 5 to 10 years ago. We're talking about it more now because these aren't easy questions to answer, Sarah, but we need to get them out there if we're really committed, I think, to supporting the students the best way we can.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point about focusing on those student groups that actually need the help, but without them feeling, like you say, that they're being stigmatized or kind of focused on, too readily. We've seen that in practice, actually. So when we've got in to run kind of workshops in schools, and we've worked with, so one of our flagship programs is where we work with white males from working class backgrounds. And what we saw was a real disconnect sometimes when we went in between what the teachers had told the students and then why they were actually there in the workshop. So, we turn up to run our session, and the lads would look around and they'd kind of be like, oh, like, there's all of us lads, we're all a bit similar. They kind of, they would say, we the bad lads. Is that why we've been pulled out of class?
Exactly, yeah.
But the teachers, there wasn't that level of communication. So I suppose, like you say, it's trying to communicate that in a way that is appropriate and doesn't make them feel, like you are stigmatizing them or targeting them. It's
difficult. I do think that in terms of supporting students when they enter higher education, we have really got into that discussion more in the past 5 years or so. And we do see in our NEON members the way in which they organise their work and structure their work. You're seeing people working through that whole student journey, if you like, not just on the access element, but the access element, and then, of course, the teaching, learning, and success, if you like, and then progression. I think your other question about how we focus on certain groups, but again, that's also a resource issue, because over the years, it's always been difficult because teachers and schools don't have the resources to really engage with this work in the same way. And I'm sure you can relate to your experience. When I was back in the more face-to-face work, we'd arrive in schools and the young people hadn't been prepared. They didn't know why we were there, what we were looking to do.
Yeah.
And they were always therefore a little bit wary of what you're trying to do. Have we been put together because we've done the wrong thing, or and having those open up. And that's, it's easy to say, oh, well, the schools should have done a better job preparing them. But the problem is the schools don't have the time to do so. So they've got to teach them things. It's like, you're just blaming them and say, oh, they didn't do it on purpose. It's just difficult. But I think that has also been a challenge. It goes back to our points earlier on about you do need funded, collaborative structures in which you can actually give support to all stakeholders. And that's not just the higher education element of the universities to engage in this work, but the schools and colleges as well.
Yeah.
Because if you want them to really engage with you in work with learners, they need resources to do so, because they're under huge financial resource pressures, as we know.
Yeah, completely agree. So let's move on to NEON then.
NEON,
your baby.
Yes,
yeah.
NEON. Yes, NEON.
So a very successful national network to support equity in education. Saw that for myself coming to. Well, I've been to quite a few kind of the residentials, as you know, as you've seen me there. So you're obviously the director and the founder of NEON. I just wanted to know, this is more from a personal point of view, how did it all come about? Like, how did you start the network? What was the catalyst for this?
So in the latter days of Aim Higher, when we tried to campaign for the continuation of the Aim Higher programme, we were unsuccessful. But it became apparent to me, to a group of others as well, that we would benefit from a national voice in this area, a national organisation, because the problem was Aim Higher was divided up into, I think, 40-odd regional partnerships, so that national picture was difficult to pull together. But of course, you had the regulator, the Education Funding Council for England at the time, but their job was very much that of a public body. It wasn't to represent the group as the sector as such. So we felt there was a need for that. So what actually happened was, a few months after Aim Higher was defunded, I brought together a group of around 30 people or so in Manchester to talk about this concept, and there's a lot of people supportive of it. But of course, somebody's got to do something. And the problem was that
is true.
A lot of them also, remember, at the time I was starting a regional projects initiative in London called Access HE. So I had a little more latitude to do this. And we worked in a representative organisation for universities called London Higher, I did. And it was to the credit of the chief executive at the time that she shared the vision of access, but also gave me latitude to do things. The problem was, my colleagues who worked in universities didn't have that latitude. So it's all right saying they couldn't have started it because them restrictive jobs, if you like, and priorities to do so, and I had more flexibility. Effectively, I could go out and do not what I wanted, but things I felt were good things, and I was really lucky to be able to do that. And it's because of the support I received from the CEO at the time, who to do that. And without her support, they might not happen because you needed flexibility. Because at the start, we just started with some regional activities, because our partners in universities were able to support us by providing a venue and rooms about cost, but they weren't able to do all the other things around it. So we did some regional activities, and then that gave us the idea that, there was a room for, and also, not just national voice, but capacity building as well. We thought was really important. Professionalisation, focus on skills. We didn't want to get into direct delivery work because that's what universities did. So we don't replicate what everybody else did. Our members did that. So we don't do things that replicate what they did. It wouldn't make any sense. And it also, then, of course, appears like it's competitive. And then they're no longer become part of a national organisation that way. So we did that, and we did some regional events, and they were relatively successful. Then we thought, look, this is okay, but I also knew there were other organisations who were sort of similar to this, what we were doing, but they survived really upon a national conference and the voluntary contributions of those people on their steering committees. And that's hard work. I mean, and great credit to those people who commit their time to that. But it's difficult, that model, because, of course, people want to commit, but also have other jobs to do so. My view was that if you do it properly, you need to generate your own income. You need to do things all year round. And you need to have an actual secretariat. So I thought if you can't do that, if it doesn't work, that I would have stepped aside and left it to the other organisations that were already there on voluntary contributions from staff to lead things. But we were lucky enough to be able to get enough members together, and able to we had 50 odd members at the start, and then we were able to get some staff, and we grew from there. And then we've got 150 members now.
Wow.
But it's always difficult, you see, Sarah. Every year, membership organisations, there's always have to keep reaffirming and reproving to members your value, particularly when you're in an environment as we are in higher education now, where resources are very tight, because one of the first ways of making economies is to not join as many things. Because so we've seen that. We have lost members in the last year or so, often for people, the organisations who are saying we don't want to be part of NEON anymore, it's not valuable, but we just simply have to make economies over across the whole institution. But we've worked hard to get new ones as well. So quantum members hasn't changed very much. It's you constantly have to think about creating new channels. So this year, for instance, we've always had our capacity building programme. We've kind of announced the events through the year, if you like, to be flexible as we can be. This year's a change. We're launching our whole annual programme with an event, a little plug-in event in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And we've never done that before. We never really had a full annual programme announced in September, because you've got to keep changing, keep moving things forward. Because if you don't, then, as I say, people will look for other ways of supporting their staff and supporting the access and success work they do. You can't you can't just sit back and say, okay, people are members this year, they'll be members following year, or you don't change things every year entirely, but you need to keep moving it forward. And we've tried to keep doing that through the years, and I think that's enabled us to be sustainable, I would say.
And to keep delivering the value.
Value is crucial. We keep the value. We try hard to make sure the events are worthwhile, that we always try and give opportunities to speak and present to people in the membership, and work hard as well also to get input from policymakers, from regulators and more senior figures, because our job is to try and bring that voice to our membership as well. And we've worked hard on that. So we're having our annual event at Labour Party conference is coming up in 3 weeks, and we have the new Minister, Jackie Smith, will be doing a talk for us there, our discussion event, and we've worked hard to kind of maintain a relationship in that way as well.
Yeah.
You have to, I think.
Definitely. I would attest to that as well, having been to quite a few of your events. So I would agree. So what does NEON exist to do? If you were just to kind of name one thing.
I think NEON exists to continue to goal that we discussed earlier in the discussion, which is to address inequalities and access to success in higher education. What it exists to do doesn't do that by organising or delivering activities directly with learners. Doesn't do that by providing financial support. It does that by supporting universities and other organisations in the country to deliver their work as effectively as possible. That's what it exists to do. We do that by providing opportunities for collaboration, opportunities for shared practice, direct capacity building through skills development work, but also research and advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
So we will produce work we think is valuable to our members, and we'll advocate on behalf of our members to policymakers and others as best we can.
And then are there any kind of key successes that stick out in your mind that you feel really proud of that Neon's achieved? Yeah.
I guess, the one thing I was proud of is the fact it still exists, because, frankly, if it wasn't being impactful, people wouldn't still want to be part of it. Okay, so I'm proud of that. I guess the awards are an important part of Neon. I guess I'm not proud of the awards themselves, but I think that providing opportunity to bring together really interesting examples of leading practice, I think that's always been an important part of the Neon calendar. I think we're proud of that. I think we're proud of the fact we have working groups that have maintained their existence for several years in areas such as addressing differences in ethnicity, attainment gaps, working at primary level, supporting students with disabilities. We're proud of those groups and the work they've managed to do in maintaining those forums for sharing of practice. We're proud of that. I don't think there's one particular part, something that happened in 2018 or 19 we're proud of. We're proud of the fact that we're continuing to be here and provide what we believe to be support for the sector, and we're doing it in a slightly different way to what we were even 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. I guess one thing, I suppose, through the pandemic, I think, I know we're proud, but I think we worked hard during that period as well. We developed a whole new online, we brought together different online support activities for learners under a program Uni for Me, that we developed a platform for these things. So we're proud of the fact that we managed to maintain that momentum during that period. But yeah, I think that's important. The fact we're still here, the fact we're still providing value is really, really important. And the fact that we can have events and we can have things like our annual conference, people go away and say how useful, how it shaped their work. I think it's really important. That's what matters. People at conference go, do you think the conference is successful? And I say, well, do you think it's successful? Because that's what really matters. I think, if I think it's successful because a lot of people are here, whatever, and it's that. But do you think it's successful? Are you going away from that thinking you've taken something from this that will help you with your work and be made new collaborations? And we're proud to say that invariably those conversations are positive. We think it's really important.
Yeah, great. And then we also spoke a bit about some of your global plans. So is this part of Neon? So I know that you've mentioned recently about some plans for launching a world access to higher education. Is that something that's launching WAHEN in December? Yeah.
In December it is, yes, in Oxford. It's a kind of an offshoot of Neon, if you like. It will have its own steering group. It will be still formally part of the Neon in the sense of Neon the charity, but it may well spin off entirely on its own at some point. With that work, as I said before, I think we felt a number of things. We felt, that our members would get great value from understanding and learning what's happening in other countries. As I said before, we are one of the countries in the world where this issue of inequalities and access and higher education is a higher priority. And we spoke before about the issues with the government and how it changes and university leaders. But relatively speaking, to the country is a higher priority, which means we've got a well-developed community of practice. It's something that all universities have to do as part of AP participation plans, etc. However, what that means is you inevitably become insular in your focus. You have to, because that's what your plans do. And the advantage of having the ability to connect with those other countries is that you can then think a little outside of the box a little bit. You start to step back and say, okay, actually, maybe it's done a little bit differently here. And this allows you then to reflect and then innovate in your own context. We felt that was an important opportunity. B, we felt that we had a responsibility to show some kind of leadership. We do have a well-developed community who believes in this work. And again, it's a little bit like Neon. If there was a global network that really took forward these activities, then we won't feel the need to start one. But
there's a gap.
And I know that for a fact because I've been doing this work for a decade. We've worked with UNESCO, we've worked with the World Bank, we've worked with the OECD, we've worked with the International Association of Universities. If there's one there, it's hiding itself pretty well because I've looked around the world for it. So, and people say, why are you doing it? Well, I say, look, And I also think about education, because in higher education, there are global networks in most fields of universities and education. In most subject areas, you will have an international organisation you can work with. Outside of subject areas, for instance, international education, you would have a global networks, of course. But also even in areas of key administration, such as finance, such as HR, there are global networks. There isn't one in the field of equity and access. And I believe there should be one. I believe that it can add value to what we do domestically, to what others do domestically. And I believe that we have a responsibility to try and do that. And we're launching our World Access to Education Network in December. It will provide NEOM members the opportunity to engage and link with colleagues across the world through similar mechanisms we do at the moment, through forms of primarily online capacity building activities, through forms of online forums, etc. as well. And we will return to World Access to Education Day, because WAHEN was built as we go WAHED. For 5 years, we had something called World Access to Education Day. We had one day where we would try and focus the efforts of institutions, organisations on inequalities in education. And because we did this because we were involved in the delivery of 2 global conferences on education access and success in the mid-2010s. Problem was that unlike some other academic fields where there are resources to travel, you can go to a conference in America, etc. And the university will be able to pay, or you'll get a grant to do so. As you know, in our field, Sarah, there isn't that kind of money to do that. So we did the conferences are very good, but I constantly have people email me going, I can't afford to come. Can you find scholarships? Come on, I continually said, no, I don't have the money. I realised that we need to do something different. So rather than having one conference, say London or Cape Town or Amsterdam, whatever, we said, why don't we have a day where people can do things in their own environment, their own university and organisation under the banner of WAHED. So we bring people together in that way. And then, of course, what happened was under the pandemic that as online communication became more normalised and these online conferences became the norm all of a sudden, we had 2 or 3 very large online conferences. And they were very, very valuable, and we'll continue to do that. And we hope it'll be successful, and we hope that it'll make a difference. Because as I say, inequalities in higher education don't just exist in the UK, they exist across the world.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, it comes back as well to that.
Absolutely.
I suppose the catalyst for NEON, and you said the first thing was about collaboration. And obviously we're speaking about collaboration nationally, but this is now like global collaboration when it comes to this issue of equity. So yeah, I look forward to seeing that launch in December. Okay, so moving on to the new government now. Labour. Yes. We've touched on them a little bit, but we're going to do a bit more of a deep dive onto it now. I'd just be really interested to hear your thoughts on this topic. So, Graeme, what do you think a Labour government means for access and participation?
Well, hopefully it's a positive news. I think that the modern era, if you like, of widening participation, I call it modern era because prior to, say, the late 1990s, when you talked about access and widening access to education, you mainly thought about older learners. So there had been a lot of work done through things like access courses that gave opportunities for older learners to enter higher education. The idea of there being specific work plans, as we've got APPs or whatever, or specific things like 8R, etc., to do this kind of work, prior to the 1990s wasn't really the norm. It didn't exist. So the modern era of widening participation was brought in by the Labour government. The Blair governments through 97, 2001, 2005, really brought this work forward. David Blunkett, for instance, who we continued to work with, David, was the Education Secretary, really drove forward some of this work for his 50% target in 2001, etc. So there's a history of widening access within the Labour government, which I think is important.
Yeah.
To tap into. It is important to tap into that kind of that background, if you like. When it comes to more contemporary issues, I think let's talk about what's happened since 2011. Up until the last government, there was quite a level of support still from the Coalition of Conservatives for access work. It wasn't as significant as we saw under Labour. But then again, in fairness, the development of access and participation plans is really important. That happened under a Conservative coalition-led government.
Yeah.
Without those plans, and as much as they could be criticised, provide a platform for engagement by universities which is as robust as any you'll see in the world. And we look globally. No other countries have things like APPs now, and they make universities engaged. Perhaps they don't want to, but they're important. In the past 5 years, I think things have turned. I mentioned earlier on, I think there was a turn away from our work under the last government. It's disappointing to see, but I think it did happen. Now, where we are now, we want to see, of course, that level of support returning. We'd like to see, of course, even on a rhetorical level, a support and engagement in our work. But of course, it has to come forward to practical measures. So I do think that, in a way, broadly speaking, there's questions about higher education. What's it for? What's its purposes? What kind of education system do we want in England, particularly? I think that it's overdue to have that discussion. We had the Org review in 2018.
Yeah,
it told you things about change, but it didn't really tell you, for me, what sort of system you wanted. There was about 50 odd recommendations. It told you about certain things and certain kinds of delivery. But I think we're at a point now where clearly we need to advocate for access work. Well, that's important. I think when you have a new government, particularly a new government, the overall higher education sector wants to see, you've got this kind of groundswell of asks. There's lots of people who want things from this government. Things with new Labour government 14 years, because they generally believe that, and probably was, remembering that if you look at the sector of higher education, generally leans to the left. Let's be fair about it. And also, there's things that any new government you want to see. It's a change, isn't it? It's a change in party as well, not just changing in Conservative administration or Labour, changing party. A lot of people want things, okay? So it's really important that those working in this area, in access and success, have an idea of what we want and a way of advocating for it, because a lot of people want things. In an environment as well where we know resources are tight, and the funding of higher education is also a major challenge at the moment. We alluded to this earlier on. It's a difficult one here. Something that's difficult for might be seen as easy, but we have a situation where fee hasn't gone up in 12 years, so universities have less money to teach. But we also have a system where internationally, again, if we look at international comparisons, it's per capita and most expensive place to study in the world. In the US, you have higher individual university fees, some up to $30,000, $40,000. But for many, it's $5,000 or $6,000, $3,000. So there's a big range. Okay. Yeah. So on average, it's more expensive here. And you also have you have loans, but you have very little direct student support. Squaring that circle is important without other investment, which constantly told by the Labour government it's not there.
Yeah.
So we need to advocate for what is there. Particularly important is a regional collaborative outreach program, whether it's called Uniconnect or something else. My personal view is that you need to have some idea about reframing and moving the program further. It's not my view that you should look at what's here at the moment and say, well, continue just doing this and let's just give us some money to do it. Not because this is Uniconnect is valuable. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's an important program. I'm not saying that it's doing a bad thing. That's sort of need to change it. But politically speaking, you're better off reframing and moving something forward as a Labour programme.
So how would you reframe it? What would be the key things you'd look to do?
Well, I think personally, for instance, a strong regional focus it has, really emphasising the engagement of local stakeholders, not just schools, but also local authorities, combined authorities, in that broader devolution, post-levelling up agenda. That's important in that as well. I think strongly as well about that connection between access and success. Not that it should just be an access programme, but what's that mean for success as well? And how do we structure universities really feel some ownership of it? One of the problems has been, I think, that we had a profile for aim higher. Uniconnect's really suffered because it hasn't been able to get that level of support. Thirdly, as well, for instance, this constant stream of regional collaborative outreach programmes, they're run very closely and tightly by the regulator, be that HEFCE or OFS. I believe it needs a separate national coordination arm that brings these things together. But there are inefficiencies, for instance. There are inefficiencies. Everybody having their own website, that's great, but is that the best way to do it? Really? From the outside, I know why people do it. I know people won't like that. Yeah. But if you're sitting from the outside and you look from the outside and go, why do you have all your websites then? Why do you do things differently? And it's an easy criticism. Not as if one thing, it's one thing, but national voice and coordination is important. But aside from Uniconnect or whatever successor of it, obviously I think many have advocated for greater student support for the learners that we discussed there really need it. As you said before, Sarah, that's important. I think in return to maintenance grants as a minimum is important. I think also thinking about the access to participation plan regime, what does that look like? I mean, all these plans, yes, we've changed them again, but things like the Equal Opportunities Register, is that really been a helpful way forward? The focus on attainment, has that been really helpful? And I also, to be honest, I do wonder about the model where we have a director of access to participation who appears very powerful as an individual. I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about that, to be honest. I don't think that's the way. Should we have done that? We've become used to that now.
So how would you? Yeah, is that an open one then to come back to? Possibly.
Do we really? Should we have this kind of idea that we have an individual and it sits upon that individual to drive this forward nationally?
Yeah, I suppose it's thinking about that shared responsibility that we've maybe come back to.
Exactly. I mean, what we need to think ways of. It's not to say that I think the sector is committed to widening access to inequalities. By the way, I think it is. As much as I said before about acknowledging our own inequalities as a sector, but I think we do to an extent, and I think it is. I mean, we many of our members, the leaders of our institutions that work with have created leadership, but there could be other ways of national leadership in this area that aren't dependent upon this role. And it's not about, this is about the occupancy of the role. I'm not talking about the occupant of the role now or whatever. It's not like the person. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the model. The idea of having a laser individualized focus here as the way of driving forward change. Maybe think of other ways of thinking about it. I mean, and one would hope, of course, that Labour would also finally be, I think it goes across the whole sector, much more receptive to discussion and ideas and consultative. And whoever does move forward in the space does it in such a way as to bring the sector along with it. I think that's really important. And of course, we're in this access field as well, like in others. Many have different views to me and will have different views as NEO members. So it's important that goes forward as well.
Yeah. I think they're all really good reflection points to think about going forward. And I suppose coming back to what we spoke about just in terms of barriers and what's facing students today. And one of those topics that we spoke about was obviously the economical kind of constraints that sometimes that face students and the fact that it's become much more acute now. Something in the manifesto around kind of the Labour manifesto around breaking down barriers is looking at, breakfast clubs was something that was focused on, and particularly, I don't know, how do you, I suppose, focusing on that angle to break down barriers as Labour has coined it, is that an angle that you think would be successful?
I think they've got the opportunity mission. Yeah. The opportunity mission is quite schools focused. That's one particular challenge. I mean, I think it's not, there's not much an HE in there.
No.
And I think we did see some lines in the manifesto regarding ensuring that all those who wish to go to university, have the ability to do so. I think that's important.
Yes.
But as I said before, I think it's really important we advocate at this time now for the ideas that we're thinking about. And I think Labour's ideas on opportunity are forming, I would say. I don't think they entered into government. Remembering, think about trajectory, they've gone a long way in a short time. If you think about Tony Blair's out at the moment, selling his new book on leadership, I don't know if you've seen that, but it's in the Guardian today, he'll be selling it next week. And in that, it's remarkable. He said how much Labour's changed as a party from, where they were to where they are. And I think the odds on Labour winning the election, as they have in this ridiculous landslide 4 years ago, would have been huge. You're going to make a killing on this. Now, of course, lots of things happen, like the pandemic and this kind of thing, but so what it means is that if you look in previous times, let's say when Blair himself came into power, he came into power then when there'd been a quite long gestation period for policy development of ideas, probably right from Kinnock through Smith over 5-6 year period. It's not been the case here under the Starmer's government. So point being, ideas such opportunity are up for discussion. What's important is to think about what opportunity means. Does opportunity really just mean what happens in schools? Does opportunity mean, because of course there's been a slight tack-in for Labour to win the election around skills. Let's talk about skills. We know technical skills. People generally see technical skills as opposed to higher education. It's not the case. We need to see it that way. We need to ensure, we need to work hard to get higher education participation and inequalities in higher education participation addressed as part of what Labour sees as opportunity. and seeing then what flows from that. Breakfast club's a good idea. No, it's a bad idea. I mean, instead of all that, they're more difficult to implement than you might think. And I used to work with colleagues in local authorities, and it's really difficult to do so, actually. And it's a difficult one as well for schools, because what's happened with schools is there's been a mission creep with schooling in the past 10, 15 years, where they become not just places of education, but places of social services support, where you feed people, where you clothe people. I'm not saying that's a bad idea either, but it's happened almost surreptitiously and not by plan. And if you've got lovely teachers in the room here who talk about breakfast clubs, and they'll talk openly, honestly, probably say, yeah, of course we think our children should be fed before they start schooling. Nobody denies that it's hard to study on an empty stomach, and nobody wants to see our kids coming in hungry. Nobody's saying that for one thing at all. But for us to be the feeders of them, it's not as easy as it sounds, for sure. But not that we won't do it, but it's a tough one. I think there's other things as well. I mean, I think commitment to careers advice, careers advice is an expansion of that's an important thing, and a welcome proposal. I think careers, for instance, again, we had much greater collaboration with careers advisors in the past than we've been able to do so in the last 10 years or so. And because the careers support and the careers community, of course, have faced great pressures.
Yeah,
I think that's an important area. If you get any career support, would be very welcome. The curriculum review as well, coming up, led by Professor Becky Francis.
Yes, I've seen that. Yeah.
I know Becky well from previous work done in the past, and I know Becky is committed to addressing inequality without doubt, very much committed indeed. But again, when you talk about curriculum review, to what extent in that review can we, in the access community, have an input and say that, the kind of subjects that delivered do matter for HE progression, how they're taught matter as well.
Yeah.
Because it extends all the way from level 3 as well, that curriculum review. But being part of that discussion, from a policy point of view, is really, really important.
Yeah.
Because it's more difficult for us to do that. And we've just slipped away a bit, I think, in the past 5 years or so, a little longer than that focus on inequalities and access to education, partly because of cost in a way, but other reasons as well.
Do you see that as a role for Neon to kind of be advocating in?
It has to be. It has to be within our members, but we have to, because that's part of the reason we're again, back to our earlier point, what's our rationale? If we're there to support those organisations who undertake this activity on a day-to-day basis, or it's part of their mission or part of their commitment, be that universities and others. Part of our role is to provide that capacity building support, opportunities of collaboration, sharing practice, sharing knowledge, but also an advocacy role as well. And we've always been open about that. It's not the only thing we do by any means. We're not a public affairs specific organisation, but it's part of what we need to do. And it's also not just about, we're working with others in the sector as well, working with other membership organisations, be they national or regional, to work with them in collaboration in terms of developing these messages, these ideas, working with Labour and others, to ensure that when decisions are made or strategies put forward and reviews are taken, that inequalities in access and success are part of that discussion, review, policy, etc.
Yeah, so it's from the start. It's not kind of something that's almost tagged on.
Exactly. It has to be. It has to be. And again, I think overarching for me, the idea of opportunity is really important. I think the next year is important. As Labour comes to understand what opportunity means, inequality opportunity means, part of that is inequality in progression to education. That's part of inequality in society. It's really crucial that idea that then will shape the policies over the next 4 or 5 years. What we believe, what we do, the inequality we see and work on is part of that discussion and debate going forward.
Yeah, definitely. And then I suppose just closing off this this discussion around Labour, what do you think the kind of key priorities and considerations are for strategic leaders in educational institutions under this new government? Are there certain things that they should be kind of thinking about or preparing for in terms of potential policy shifts, would you say?
Well, I guess it depends what you mean by, I mean, I guess you're talking about schools, and you're talking about colleges, you're talking about HE.
I suppose higher education.
I guess for HE, again, I think that the HE leaders, the financial sustainability issue looms over them. Obviously, international recruitment, international students are an important part of that. You know, where will the government stance on that be? Because they provide people talk about income stream, not just an income stream. They're an important part of what we do in UK higher education is we're very open. We provide great opportunities for learners across the world, and we want to continue to do so. That's an important part of that. How you fund higher education is important, crucial. What I guess, again, for Labour, a relationship to skills as well. There's a new body called Skills England forming, which hopefully is going to coordinate and take forward the delivery of skills and making sure that we understand that higher education provides people with skills. When you look at many of the courses that higher education institutions offer, they are actually extremely vocational courses. Medicine is the most vocational course you're going to get. Prepares you to be a doctor.
It's true.
At the end of the day, dentistry is the same. We provide vocational skills in the sector. So again, making sure that higher education is part of what Skills England development is going forward. And I guess also, I think what we tend to see is thinking about how education contributes. A lot of that discussion before was about contributing to levelling up was something that I talked to a lot about. Levelling up was centre, levelling up was something we had here at University of West London highlight. But growth will be another question for Labour. How higher education contribute to growth? But we must contribute in a way that also is authentic to our own mission, which is working with students and taking research. And ensuring that you're able to be part of those discussions as a sector really, but not reactive, but proactive in doing that. So we're leaders, I suppose, and mission bodies, that's what they're thinking about at the moment. And I know the UK, for instance, are producing their own kind of white paper on higher education that will come out in the autumn. They're again trying to get forward, get on the front foot in shaping what could be a future review of higher education, I guess. And then finally, the role of the Office for Students. That also is important. What is the future role for Office for Students?
Yes, that
it's
will
not
be
been a popular body that's far with the sector. And one thing I would say about that as well is that as well as international work under WAHEN, I've also been a parliamentary research fellow at the House of Commons Library for the past 2 years. And that role has involved producing several reports looking at both higher education systems within the 4 nations of the UK, but also higher education systems globally. And what's interesting is of the OECD countries, there are only 5 countries that run their higher education systems through a semi-autonomous public body like the Office for Students. The idea is that we look at, again, it's about thinking about I'm not saying it's a bad thing, by the way, or we shouldn't have higher education funding council for England or anything like that. I'm saying we shouldn't have that. But we tend to think that everybody has that.
Yes.
It isn't the case. Basically, the rest of the OECD countries are divided between higher education being run by a Department for Education, a Ministry or Department for Higher Education. We believe in this country we should always have a deep non-departmental public body, which I'm not saying we should abolish it altogether, but there'll be a lot of discussions about Office of Students, how it relates to Skills England, for instance, and those kind of debates. And that will be very important to the sector. What does the OFS do? Who chairs it? Who leads it? Will it be different to the OFS that we've had so far, etc., etc.?
Yeah.
And how does it measure quality and success, etc. as well? What are the measures which, because there's a measure of retention and success? As you know, the B3 measures they call it has been one that has challenges certain institutions because, of course, if you're going to bring in students from different backgrounds who haven't got the same levels of prior qualification and obviously have maybe come from backgrounds where they have to work and have great economic challenges, what does success mean for those students? I'm not saying you should set lower thresholds for bars for not press them and push them, but inevitably they might have different outcomes.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic around that, just thinking about what success looks like for different students and ones from students from different groups. And we spoke about that earlier in the conversation, and you were mentioned as well quite personally that actually, how we define success might not be how somebody else from a different background defines their own success. So it's a fine balance. Do you think we need to redefine what success looks like for students from underrepresented backgrounds?
I think a discussion about that's really important. Is really important. I think overall, a discussion about success for those who finish and progress from higher education is really important because, of course, economic factors are a huge part of what success means. Of course, obviously, when you've got a system where you are accumulating large amounts of debt, of course, it's important, but it is not the only factor. There are students who go into higher education courses with the full knowledge that they will not go on from that. They in all likelihood, in their future careers, earn what we describe as very large amounts of money. They're aware that may happen for them in their lives. Who knows? But in all honesty, the likelihood is they won't. But they still enter higher education because they are things they want to do afterwards to acquire a degree.
Yeah.
Or believe that education will provide the foundation for that. Yet we continue to have a fair, overall quite blunt measure which tends to focus primarily on employment and income.
Yeah.
And we said, of course, we know that HESA and others are developing more qualitative tools where we think about, where we try to interact with students when they left higher education and say, what do you do now? Is this work commensurate with your expectations? Are you happy in this work, etc.? But that is a very important debate to have, Sarah, I think, for all groups of students. It's a balance. I entirely agree that we shouldn't therefore say, because a student comes from background A, the expectation is that we only should expect that for them to achieve outcome B. And therefore that potentially means the university is not doing the best job it could with them. But at the same time, we have to understand that the student comes from outcome A, that, of course, there are greater challenges than a student from outcome X or whatever. And therefore, that should be reflected in when we think about progress they've made with that institution, what the institution has done with them. Because the flip side, if you don't do that, you disincentivize students, universities, to admit students from certain backgrounds, because they're worried that if they admit them, they don't do so well, and they will be penalised somewhere down the line.
Yeah.
But these discussions need to open up, and we have as a sector with the government, with the OFF. This is how we will come to better conclusions through consultation, collaboration, discussion. I don't have all the answers to these questions, but I do think, as we pointed out, there's some things that need to be addressed.
Yeah, definitely. And then I suppose moving on from that, then we talked about kind of these measures and some quite blunt measures in terms of measuring some of these outcomes and successes for students. What does achieving true parity look like for you beyond those traditional measures and metrics that we have?
True parity? Well, that's an interesting question. I think certainly, bluntly speaking, if you had to have true parity, you would have a much, much higher percentage of learners from lower socioeconomic groups going to education you do at the moment. That would be greater parity in a society. Yeah. But you might have less coming from other backgrounds, Why is it not those who go to private school and become electricians? Why not? Why not? What's wrong with that? Well, that probably doesn't happen. And people say that's not something. Why not? Why shouldn't it be? Of course. The problem is, of course, is the expectation of what you pay for at certain schools, and that's not seen as success. But look, it is a parity. I mean, I think that you would want to see a higher percentage of learners entering higher education from lower socioeconomic backgrounds or proxy measures of. Okay, I still maintain that to say that if you have a part of the country where there's only 15-20% of those learners from physically backgrounds going to higher education, and that there are 80% who don't have the potential to go, the ability to go, or desire to go, if indeed they're provided with the requisite information and support to do so, then I don't believe that's the case. If they were provided, I'm not saying that they would all want to do so and that they have to do so, but they're provided with the information and support to enable them to make the effective choices at the appropriate times. If they're provided with that, then I would strongly bet anybody that far more would go on to higher education. That's what would happen.
I suppose it's not also, it's parity of outcome, it's also the parity of choice, and students have.
And then when they enter, and then of course, in terms of parity of outcome from higher education, then of course you want to see students from different backgrounds achieving academic outcomes at broadly commensurate levels. So you need to address certain problems. We do know that only today, again, the latest OFS data, we emphasise the fact that there are considerable gaps in terms of awarding first between students from different ethnic backgrounds.
Yeah.
And yes, that does need to be addressed. That's a gap. Why is that gap there? We did some data analysis on that as well. The data is quite instructive when you sort of look at those things, in that actually you see even certain institutional data, which we looked at, kind of bunching of students. So a lot of students actually are achieving, let's say, 2-1, but not getting to first level. So there's certain things you look at with that as well. With that one, I think that specific challenge, there are certain things you can look at with that when it comes to assessment, when it comes to marking, or to dig into that more detail, because it isn't the case when we looked at this data in London. What we found was it was particularly at 2-1 first level was an issue there. It wasn't the case that you had certain groups in different ethnic backgrounds just really, really far behind across all graduate schemes. It seemed to be they were getting to a certain point and then not progressing to that, not achieving that.
Ceiling.
Yeah, the ceiling issue, yeah. So what's causing that? There must be something there, because, but yeah, no specific things we could do possibly about that. Certainly I think the broader issue of participation by those from different social backgrounds. As we said before at the start of the discussion, they're perennial and deep-rooted discussions, deep-rooted issues. But it goes back to the challenge of why are there differences in GCSE or any form of assessment you could have at the school leaving age between different groups. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? And what's true parity mean there? But yeah, I mean, I think that that would be my idea of what you need to achieve.
Yeah. So thanks so much for your time so far. I know we've run over. I do have a couple more questions which I'd love to just get your point of view on, and then I'll let you go because I'm sure you've got a busy day.
Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you, Graeme, was would you be able to kind of predict some key trends in higher education over the next 5 to 10 years? What would you say the key trends are? Yeah.
Interesting question. I think in terms of the area we looked at, which is participation, of course.
Yes.
You are, of course, seeing an increase in younger students at the moment. We know that. And then that's going to be a tailing off there. And that'll provide the sector with a challenge there, I think, how to deal with that. I do think that we'll continue to see probably an overall a steady increase. I think we'll see increase in participation still, only because I still don't think the alternatives to higher education are probably as robust as they need to be. We have to be honest here, but in some ways what's driven some of the increases in participation is not necessarily higher education becoming more attractive, but there being more students coming to the point where they believe they need to enter, looking at the alternatives, not seeing them as attractive. So I'm not sure we're still at that point where we'll see those robust alternatives coming through. That's a Labour challenge. But even then, you see, that's important to think about that challenge, because when we think about that challenge, we think about there being this group of students, some should go to HE and some should go to vocational learning. There's a very large number of students, 10% of all 18 to 24-year-olds are not in education, employment and training, are NEET. Now, there's huge groups of students who actually aren't in education and training location they need to be. When we talk about expanding vocational and even HE offerings, they're the group we should focus on. Not trying to work out whether we're taking this student from who would be in HE, not going to HE or not. To the other trends, I think we'll increasingly see more flexibility in innovation in delivery of courses by higher education institutions.
Yeah.
Whether we're going to see that kind of real bite-sized learning revolution that we're thinking about, I'm not sure. And I do worry whether we're going to get older learners coming in as much as we'd like to do. I think we haven't spoken very much about younger learners today. But
yes, we have. Yeah.
I think for older learners, I think that's a challenge. Will we see them coming into higher education as much as we'd like to? I think I'd like to see that happen as a trend. I'll be hopeful to see that happen. But we'll see more innovation in delivery, definitely. I think the universities are adapting. You are seeing them offering courses at different times, in different ways, in more flexible ways. That will continue. So the make of the sector will look different in that way. Whether you will see, I hope we don't see too many configuration changes in the sector, i.e. mergers and the like. I'm not sure they're always appropriate. And I hope we don't see that. We do have a lot of higher education institutions in our country relative to other countries, but that's that's a strength, I believe, offers diversity of choice, diversity of provision to prospective learners. I would like to see that continue as a trend, hopefully. But yeah, I think those are some of the main trends. I think we will hopefully see participation increase. Hopefully we'll see the sector remain as it is. But I think also we will see different forms of learning being offered. And I do hope as a trend that we start to think about how we'll always talk about technology as a trend, don't we? How will that aid our work, internally in access as well? How will it aid our work in access and success work? I think it will become more important. How, I'm not sure, but it will become more important. But it remains also the case that these perennial challenges mean you do need intensive support for certain groups of learners. How do you provide that?
Yeah, without kind of stigmatizing them like we mentioned earlier, that balance. Indeed. Brilliant. One final question then, before I let you go.
Sure.
What can we expect to see from you next, Graeme, then?
Next? Wow.
What's next? What's next?
I guess sort of outside of NEON, the Centre for Inequality and Levelling Up has now come to a conclusion. Of course, levelling up, of course, is something that the government's moved away from. So we're launching a new research centre called the Ruskin Institute for Social Equity, or RISE, based at Ruskin College, Oxford. Ruskin College, Oxford is the college associated with Oxford, which offers progression opportunities, has for 225 years for older, mature learners. There's history. So it's history of widening participation. And it's part of the University of West London where I'm based. So I will be working quite a lot at Ruskin on Rise in the near future. With Neon, I think we want to continue with our capacity building work. I think that particularly we will hopefully have a more developed programme coming forward, which our members can see in advance much greater. Also, accreditation of our programme are really important. I think also more focused research from Neon as well, particularly in advocacy. As I alluded to earlier on, I think it's a really important year for advocacy for our work. So certainly this year, I hope we'll be able to find the capacity ourselves, not just building capacity of others in ourselves and our own secretariat and team at Neon to really push that area work forward.
And I know the manifesto is coming, is it?
Yes, there will be. There will be something that Neil's has to say as part of our advocacy drive in October. We'll lay out what we believe are our key areas. I think it'll be key priorities, if you like, for access we want to put out there and trying to shape that discussion. I think certainly some things came through the last annual conference. Clearly, that commitment to regional collaboration is one. But beyond that as well, I mean, we haven't discussed too much today, for instance, the issue around BTECs is a great concern for us and applied general qualifications. And we're quite concerned about, unfortunately, we haven't seen the reaction from the Labour government that we'd like to see on that one. So I think that will play itself out to quite an important issue, Sarah, I think, for access in subsequent years. If we do see a big move to T-levels, then I think that will have implications for widening access, because a considerable percentage of our learners entering from widening access backgrounds, if you like, do so with BTECs and A-levels. So we haven't spoken about that very much today, but I certainly think that'll be something beyond the horizon over the next couple of years. I think they have to be aware of that. And I think also, broadly speaking, I think really trying to ensure that our issue and the concern we have for our learners we serve is as high profile an issue as possible over the next year or so. That's really, I think, really important. So whatever we're doing in terms of advocacy research, even not just research, but also our capacity building work. The reason we've done our annual programme in advance is to be able to really put forward that this is important. Capacity building is important. I think we've not seen so much when we talk about APPs and deliver from OFS. It always struck me as bizarre that we talk about evaluation and other areas that's really important, yet we don't talk about staff development, developing the skills and knowledge professionalisation of our own community.
Yes.
Well, our community cannot improve without professionalising without developing our own skills. We
completely agree with that one.
We can't.
Definitely. So on that note, Graeme, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for your contributions to the sector that you've had. No, thank you. Really, really enjoyed our discussion. I think we've dug deep on a lot of things there. Some of those perennial issues that we spoke about, what we think the sector needs to do, how they need to respond, the Labour government, what we think we think the future, I suppose, might hold as well for this sector, and how Neon contributes to that going forward. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your work, Graeme. And yes, I will put some links to some of those events and things that you spoke about in the show notes as well.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for inviting me, and good luck with the future of the Student Outcomes podcast. And it appears to go okay technically. It's always a great start to these things, isn't it? So it's a wonderful start, isn't it? Things don't break down. I always think
I know, that's always the worry.
Apart from the dog in the room, there's no great deliveries coming in the door either. Noise or fire alarms or anything. So that's great.
We've done all right. We've done
okay. So thank you very much for inviting me, Sarah, and good luck with your work as well. And thank you for the contribution you're making to the sector as well. It really is. It's hugely important, and it's a community. And I think us working together is the only way we'll actually get to affect some of the big issues we spoke about today, I think.
Definitely. Thanks, Graeme.